with them in mind. First of all, we have the co-founder of Ethereum, Joe Lubin, who is joining us, as well as John Wolpert, who is a group executive focused on baseline and public blockchain technology. And we are really going to talk today about public blockchains and the enormous effort, investment, and transformation that's going on. Now, Joe and John, we had this T-shirt made, and I especially want to present it for you guys, and we'll see if we can get you a copy. But it's a sort of a pandemic-themed blockchain T-shirt, which I hope you'll love. I'm going to turn around on the back so you can see it. It's 2020, and the only thing you should have out in public is your blockchain. So I hope you guys love that. And, before I get started, before we get started, I just want to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about the amazing collaboration that EY and Consensys had getting started last year between us, right? You, John, you kind of broke the ice at, I think it was the DevCon in Osaka, and we really started talking about how we should be working together to drive the mainnet forward. And that was the beginning of an incredibly fruitful and very intense working period. And so, John, maybe just tell us the story about this and how we got started.
Well, Paul, it's really great to see. This is almost a year later. I remember it was Travis who, at the last minute, put you and I on stage at Ethereal, and I got to do something that I want to do more of, which is just interview you. So I got to be the questioner, you got to be the answerer, and that was fun for me because you're funnier, smarter, and better looking. So it was good to play the Bob Newhart
better
role.
Dressed as well,
and better dressed.
Thank you. Well, flattery will get you guys anything.
So that was a lot of fun. And then you called up a few weeks later, and you're like, let's do something. Boom, and we were off. So it's been delightful ever since.
You're right. I think it was the Ethereum Summit, and then things really started to accelerate as we got towards DevCon in Osaka. Right. Joe, talk to me a little bit about what you see as where baseline and the future of Ethereum and Consensys intersect together. Because as the co-founder of Ethereum and as the leader of Consensys, I of all the people in the world, I think of you as a person with the big picture vision on this.
Sure. So we, since really the start of Ethereum, we thought that there would be convergence. We expected that we would do some really interesting things in this crazy public permissionless context, and we'd have to build out the technology in the most Byzantine of environments, but that unless we drew in all actors from all walks of life, all pursuits on planet Earth, that ultimately we will not have succeeded in essentially bringing decentralized protocols forward, building a more decentralized web, a more decentralized global information technology infrastructure. And so early on at Consensys, we focused on the public mainnet blockchain. We intended to build applications. We ended up having to build lots of the infrastructure for the ecosystem, developer tooling, etc. And we got calls from lots of organizations, from central banks to companies and who knows. And we ended up doing as much as we could to educate, to foster adoption. Ended up doing a little bit of advisory work, which led to people asking us to build software. And so very early on at Consensys, it was very tangible that we were working towards convergence, bringing the sort of button-down business ecosystem that needed privacy, confidentiality, security, usability, towards the Ethereum technology, and we built all of that in the private permission context, and now pretty much all of that is available thanks to you and others in the public permission context, and that's always been the goal, to bring everybody into the public permissionless context. You can build private permission systems on the public permissionless network. As you indicated earlier today, that's roughly what people do on the public permissionless internet. And so we're looking forward to all working together on a decentralized web with lots of different interoperating protocols, Ethereum and others for certain kinds of activities, but decentralized storage, decentralized bandwidth, decentralized heavy compute, decentralized proof of location, decentralized identity, etc.
So obviously, just a mountain of things, right? How important is the network effect in getting all of these to work together? Is it just about making services available, or does it matter, which companies are there and how they interact with each other? And how do we kickstart this ecosystem?
Sean, do you want that one?
Well, I think you have to take people from where they're at. I remember Mary in the previous panel said something. Said EY is so innovative and so forward-thinking that how do we follow, because we're all boring here. And I think the implication was us boring people that are doing day-to-day stuff aren't going to be able to keep up. And I thought to myself, well, wow. To say over 100-year-old accounting company that they're forward-thinking and innovative is pretty interesting. But then really that's what baselining is all about, is being able to say there's lots of exciting uses of blockchain, but let's think of the most boring one that your CISOs aren't going to lose their minds over thinking about contemplating using. So can we find a way to use the public blockchain in such a way that you aren't exposing data, that you're not giving away strategic intelligence to your competitors or to somebody with a good AI. They can't develop classifiers on your activities or your relationships. And if you can do that, why not use the mainnet, right? It's always on. You get to pay as you go. You don't have to involve capital expense. It's running for its own reasons, and you can't lock you out. And it resists tampering. So if you can do it for the boring stuff, you can do the exciting stuff later.
So blockchain is collaboration network technology. I don't know how you turn off the network effect for blockchain. I've heard you say that for every organization that agrees to join somebody else's blockchain, private blockchain system, there are two others that want to start their own private system. And effectively, the reason to build a blockchain system is to collaborate more fluidly, more effectively, more transparently, and now more privately with many organizations in your value chain or in your ecosystem. We will see a great big magnet as more and more organizations migrate their activity to the place where everybody else is. Right now, most organizations and they're sort of the forward-thinking DeFi and gaming and other organizations, and some doing a little bit more conventional business. So pretty much the bulk of them are choosing Ethereum.
So that's always encouraging to hear, and it makes me happy when I see that. And we picked Ethereum because it is by far the largest ecosystem. John, I would love for you to just talk to us a little bit about some of the logic behind one of the nicest and cleverest innovations in Baseline, which is the concept of the blockchain as a messaging bus. Right, this is something that you kind of came up with and you made sure got inserted into there. Talk to us, because of your history at IBM and your history in helping create Hyperledger. Why are message buses so important in a way that's not yet covered by traditional tokenization?
And please use the technical diagram behind you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's my magic bus above there.
Exactly.
Yes. So I mean, we were calling this the magic bus back before we could say baseline, because we hadn't for a while we hadn't come up with that word, and then boy, that turned out to be the right word. People really like it, and it's good. It's nice and verbable, right? Hey, baseline your PO and send me your PO and make sure it's baselined. Is your general ledger baseline with my general ledger, so my credit is definitely your debit, that sort of thing. And so it was the right word, but before we called it the magic bus. And the notion was simply that, there's this always-on bulletin board that you could put key value pairs on. Again, this is very wonky, distributed system stuff. Any set of state machines, and SAP, Oracle, any blockchain, also a state machine. Any state machine that needs to work with another state machine needs a common frame of reference. You can either make one the primary and the other secondary, or you can set up some kind of middleware. some enterprise service bus or what have you. And usually what's involved there is you've got, you have a bulletin board and you put a Post-it note with a topic on it and you put a value with it, or you use the topic to say, go look up this value. And that's effectively what baselining is doing, is saying, hey, we're using zero knowledge and some other things to make it look like noise. But if you and I shared the location and the secret of a particular piece of a string of nonsense, we know that we both have the same piece of information in our respective traditional systems of record. We know that we are using the same business logic for it, and we know that we can go look that up as a key and look up in our respective databases and find the input values we need for the next step in the workflow. So that's why we call it a message bus. But I think actually to credit, there are people like Karthik Solper and Sam and Lucas and folks on both the EY and Consensys teams that actually invented some of the really important components that made that actually work. So at a high level, it makes sense, but then you had to make it work.
Excellent. I really appreciate that. So I want to come back to Joe. I think that the best statement I learned ever in my life about change management actually came from a Dilbert cartoon. And he says, change is good, you go first. And so Consensys, you guys have seen a lot of change. You've tried to drive a lot of change. Talk to me about how Consensys is changing now, because you are changing, and where you see Consensys going in the future.
Well, we did like to go first. Consensys started essentially to continue the vision and the mission of the Ethereum project. We configured ourselves to, as I said before, foster adoption, educate, and we brought in a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and technologists to try to figure out how to build decentralized applications, figure out what tooling's required, what infrastructure's required, and essentially we had to explore the solution space and had to play our role in opening up a brand new ecosystem. And so we did that, I believe, reasonably effectively. And I've heard that even the Big Four are now interested in being part of the blockchain ecosystem. And so there's a lot of competition in our ecosystem now as sort of the web and the internet become increasingly decentralized. It's going to come upon us very quickly, I believe. I think COVID-19 is going to be an interesting inflection point in what it does to legacy ways of doing things and what it enables and essentially demands in terms of doing things in more decentralized, more robust, more anti-fragile ways. And so in the last couple of years, we've started to look more into becoming a sort of normal software company. We started as a venture production studio where lots of our projects had the potential to spin out, and they were teams that worked collaboratively with one another but didn't share a single overarching goal as a company often does. And so right now we are a software company that has a core tech stack consisting of elements at the protocol level, infrastructure level, developer tooling, and quite a bit at the application layer. So it's our Hyperledger Basic client, it's Infura, it's MetaMask, it's Codify, bringing a whole bunch of sort of applications in payments and assets and staking and document management, etc. And this stack is effectively serving as a backbone for what we're thinking of as a blockchain operating system. So where an operating system enables you to operate the resources of your computer, a blockchain operating system is going to enable us all to operate our own organizations' resources and the resources of collaboration networks, whether they're private collaboration networks or the public collaboration network or private networks attached in different ways to the public network.
So are we really headed for re-decentralization of the web, or is the power of the existing big companies there secure? How will disruption happen? Is it going to be legacy companies getting disrupted, or is it going to be new industries being built? What are we going to see most of and first?
I think it's all about enabling people to obtain greater agency, greater economic agency, greater political agency. As we're still building now for developers and for early adopters. DeFi now, decentralized finance, is starting to speak to not just crypto nerds, but financial nerds. And soon, as we work out the interfaces and make it easier for normal people to understand, zero interest rates and negative interest rates in the legacy world are just going to look terrible compared to 4% or 8% for different kinds of assets in the emerging decentralized economy. And so as we get greater control of our identity and personal information by building tools like decentralized IDs and verifiable credentials that our Uport team has pioneered, and there are others in the world who are building the same, and those standards or those products will conform to standards that make them interoperable. People are going to be in control of their assets. People are going to be able to issue their own assets. People are going to be lending and borrowing on peer-to-peer platforms, trading on different kinds of decentralized asset platforms. And these assets are going to be intrinsic to the utility and governance of collaboration networks. And so we're starting to build decentralized systems that are going to link up to one another, just like internets link up to other internets to create one great big internet. And so the governance of whether it's a game network or a supply chain track and trace network or a trade finance network or provisioning network, all of these systems will likely link into one another, either early on through some lateral connectivity, but eventually down into the magic bus, the middleware, as John often likes to call it, that is the Ethereum platform, and enable us to have personal, economic, political agency, and the governance will be much more granular. So instead of us relying on two parties in some major nations or one party in some other major nations to propose and affect policy that leaves most people wanting, we'll be able to create collaboration networks. We can spin them up, they can define their agendas, they can fund their agendas, and they can execute their agendas. And so the governance in those kinds of systems will be very granular, and I think that's going to serve a lot more people better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, we are going to get some questions from the audience, but first, I've got one more question for Mr. Wolpert, which is, John, you have done an amazing job of kind of recruiting the DeFi ecosystem into the Baseline protocol team. Talk to us about where is the ecosystem around Baseline, and what do all these participants see as the value proposition of joining in?
Well, it's astounding. I think we broke our part of the internet when we announced it, and these are real numbers, and I didn't double check because I couldn't believe them. But when we did a single announcement, a single press release on March 4th, and we got 1.2 billion in reach on that, with I think 11 million in advertising equivalency, hundreds of articles generated, and from that, within weeks, we had a GitHub repo that was hundreds of people were starring and following and forking, and it's funny. I think almost we have accelerated the motion towards a single standards operation when it comes to Ethereum wide, or mainnet, if you will. I like to say mainnet mainly because I want to say that there ought to be and the internet needs a mainnet, and Ethereum, in my point of view, is a good candidate for the job. But you should define the job and then define the candidate. And ETH, and certainly ETH2 looks like a good candidate. So we need a mainnet. And what's amazing is there are two groups of parties. There's what we used to call enterprise, and I think the joke was, crypto anarchists. I think Joe actually asked me when I moved from IBM, he said, "You want to join these crypto anarchists?" And I said, Well, I was a startup guy for a long time, so I'm okay with that. But I don't think it is enterprises and anarchists. I think it's innovators and improvers or adopters or what have you. Enterprise adopts and improves. Businesses, small and large, and all the innovators out there in the Ethereum community, and they're coming together. So we need really a single standard. But what's astounding is that behind the scenes, not the companies that are showing up in the publicly, like that are putting out their press releases, but the huge companies that are forking and getting quietly involved in baselining, getting quiet briefings and they're like, don't tell anybody we're interested in the mainnet. We can't be known. So I think that we're about to see this final breaking through where if you're a C-level executive, you don't have to threaten, your career's not threatened by saying blockchain or by saying mainnet. I would like, Paul, if you don't mind, I don't know if I can share the screen, but I think people should know the things that they should be thinking about in terms of whether or not they should be using baselining as an approach to a problem. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and share your screen. That would be great. And if you have any trouble, we'll see if we can unlock that. Oh, looks like it's working fine.
Right. So, the way we think of baseline is, speeding adoption of public Ethereum and mainnet in ways that make the problems that are real with public and private blockchain irrelevant and solve, business process automation in the process. So, you want to, the problems are data locality, data privacy, data compartmentalization, strategic leaks. The benefits are those are not issues. You have flexible integrations with no silos. You have discrete workflow confidentiality step to step, and you can do this all pay as you go with low TCO. And what you want to be looking for if you're in the use case business there, if you're in doing real things with real people, you want to say, do I have a business process automation issue between multiple partners as a primary requirement? Are a lot of those partners SMEs, or do they do low volumes with me that would make it hard to warrant setting up enterprise service bus between us because those are expensive? Does it reduce upfront project capital expense? Is that an attractive thing? Do you want to trade CapEx for OpEx? And then most primary partners maintain traditional systems of record like SAP, Oracle, and what have you, and do they want to not get rid of that? And then I'll leave the other ones except for this big one, which is not all partners should have access to or even awareness of every step in the workflow.
This is the recurring theme that you've been bringing up again and again and really helping push into the design of baseline, which is the compartmentalization requirements so that you can have complex collaboration that is compartmentalized but still mathematically provably integrated.
That's right. So that if you're using a shipper that you also happen to compete with, you can get the delivery date without them knowing who you are because they can drop that on that magic bus and you can pick that date up and have a verified date for your invoice without exposing everything you're doing with your customers or your volumes or things that they shouldn't know about. It's a good one of many examples. I guess the last one is that, and I think this is interesting from a UI perspective, if you can have a standards body or a regulator or somebody that's verifying GAP or FASB or what have you, you can write a library of zero knowledge circuits in such a way that if the counterparties are conducting business through those circuits using the baseline approach, and using a company like Duncan's team, for example, at EY is masterful at this stuff, to say, hey, we need a library of standards so that we don't have to give some people so much trouble in terms of audit or verification. That's a real opportunity. So you could see a whole industry saying, yep, do things through this set of circuits, this library, and you're going to be compliant, and we're going to have to spend less time figuring that out.
Fantastic. So, John, do we have questions from the audience? John Frechette, I should say.
Yep. So we've got a lot of good questions, Paul. One of them that came in recently, but I think John partially just answered, is what kind of Oracle technologies will be used to connect smart contracts in the mainnet with real-world data in traditional systems? I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I'm gonna, Mr. Wolpert, I'm going to give that one to you, please.
There's two kinds of data. One, and there are two participants in in baseline in the community that are doing so much work. I should probably mention them. One is UniBright, where they're a system integrator with, where they do integrations with companies like SAP and blockchain. And so you need to be able to get data and move it between, these traditional systems of record. So you need messaging. And we do need a strong messaging protocol. We're looking at a number of options, including even core to flows. So you can imagine, putting core to flows into Ethereum or NATs or something like that. So there's data, just traditional straight up. I have some data, and the only other people that should have that data are my immediate counterparties. And then there's also, deterministically being able to generate data for workflow steps where you need to be sure you have the same, because you can't just do a time lookup without creating non-determinism. So in that case, you could use something like Chainlink and other Oracle systems. Joe might have some thoughts on that.
John, any more questions, Wolpert? Frechette?
Yes, yep. We've got another one that says, what efforts are being taken to try to educate companies and governments on the benefits and use cases of using the mainnet, I'll add, outside of this webinar?
And I think, Joe, you were recently, you were in the Davos pre-COVID crisis, so you're obviously at the front lines of that.
Yeah, so we've been working with government and governmental-like bodies for a very long time, central banks especially included. We have run the European Union Blockchain Observatory for a couple of years, where we've been interacting with member nations and writing white papers and driving thought leadership. We work with different governments around the world, including the American government. It's a little bit early still with the American government. It's mostly in the formative stages of what America's response should be to this technology and how they might get behind it. But we're all over the map with respect to still attempting to foster adoption and educate.
Fantastic. John Wolpert, a closing comment before we wrap up for the day. I want to give you the last word.
Oh boy. I think I've dispatched all my...
by the way.
No, I think, like I've said, it's been a really amazingly harmonious relationship. I've never seen, and I've spent 30 years knitting companies and governments and other organizations that, were legally separate together. I don't know why I committed some kind of sin in a past life. It's a hard job. But this one has been, by all rights, getting a large group of humans together like this has been, unusually pleasant and harmonious. I would say that, people should go to docs.baseline-protocol.org. That's going to be where you can learn the fastest, and then get right into the repo. And if you want to become a member, or if you want to get on the steering committee and that sort of thing, there's lots of opportunity for that. And I hope lots of our enterprise friends and otherwise join.
Can I just steal a couple words, Paul?
Yes, you can.
So I've been watching your activities for a very long time. You've been one of the most genius and eloquent promoters of decentralized protocol technologies in some of the most difficult places in the world to do that. First on the Adept project, building an intelligent washing machine on proof of concept version 0.5, I think, on Ethereum, and using a few other technologies on that project, and then moving into another powerful legacy organization and showing them what the potential is. And so congratulations for the brilliant work, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank my guests, John Wolpert and Joseph Lubin. And John Frechette, if you would bring up our closing slide, that would be terrific. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining. And what I want to do now is just throw out a couple of thank yous. So first of all, I want to thank the EY partners around the world. EY is a partnership, and that means